President Trump popularized this approach by telling it like it is in a way that consistently disregards precision, if not accuracy, speaking in hyperbolic style that his followers understand not to be literal but also gospel truth. This is the irony that means figuratively the same thing it says literally, but in some different way that is never explained. The irony of a man who calls his wife fat and then complains that she can't take a joke. Does ChatGPT not function in many ways like a kind of gigantic unconscious, associating along paths shaped by particular connections, yet without precisely the, let's say, subjective dimension that emerges when an association hits upon a particularly sensitive, impossible point, which the psychoanalyst would call the real or the impossible. And of course, in analytic practice, such moments can serve as orienting points, something that appears to be kind of structurally absent from in IA-generated associations. But here, allow me for a brief, more dense philosophical, theoretical excursion. There is an important difference here between Lacan and what is generally called post-structuralism. The latter claims that the subject is simply an effect of discourse and nothing more, produced by discursive structures, practices, and can therefore be, in the last instance, dismissed as a concept with any independent ground. From Althusser to Foucault, and to some extent also Deleuze, and many, of course, contemporary thinkers influenced by them, we encounter some version of the thesis that, in fact, there is no subject. There are only discourses and discursive practices or structures that generate the kind of illusion, ideological illusion also, of the subject, of a subject. And if you take this and put it aside along ChatGPT, it would seem that ChatGPT seems to be an almost caricature proof, let's say, of or embodiment of this. But actually, Lacanian psychoanalytic perspective differs from these post-structuralist views in an important yet subtle way. You can say that for Lacan as well, subject is an effect of the discourse, but in a more interesting and kind of convoluted way. It is an effect not of what is there in the discourse, but of what is not there. Briefly put, it is an effect of the discourse's own ontological inconsistency, incompleteness, impossibility. And because subject is an effect of this gap or lack in the discourse, it's not simply an effect in the standard sense of cause-effect causality. It is an effect of a missing cause, we could say, which is why the subject is neither simply, let's say, the cause or the author behind the discursive signifying structuring, nor simply its product, its effect, but in a way, both in a displaced manner. So this, very briefly put, implies a kind of peculiar materialist circularity or kind of self-positing, described, for instance, by my colleague Slavoj Žižek as follows: a subject endeavors to adequately represent itself, this discursive representation fails, and the subject is the result of this failure. So there is this movement. The negativity within the structure becomes subject through a movement that takes the form of reflexivity predicated precisely on lack or impossibility inherent to discourse, what also Lacan names the real. So the subject signals this lack and does something with it. It is kind of externalized existence of the inherent impossibility within the discursive structure. The subject, you could also say, is the form in which this real or impossible exists as a crack in a given symbolic order. A crack that becomes, I think, precisely activated in all genuine thought, as well as in all emancipatory struggles. You need a way to activate this crack. And again, I would argue that this crack, or this activation rather, is precisely what is missing in IA. But let's return now to the initial question, the relationship between IA and the unconscious. So I'm tempted to pose a further, perhaps somewhat crazy question. Given the enormous quantity of language that we have uploaded into IA systems, have we also uploaded the unconscious at work or at stake in this text? This is in fact a kind of double question. On the one hand, have we uploaded all the unconscious fantasies and formations inscribed in this text, sticking to this text? Okay, recall, for instance, the now unfamous IA-generated clip portraying the future Gaza Riviera. I guess the case certainly suggests that we have, and we will return to this particular example in a moment. But before that, let me point out the other pertinent question. Apart from this positive content-related fantasy stuff, have we also uploaded something like the subject? Subject in the, let's say, more strong Lacanian sense of the term. Here, I think the answer becomes less obvious precisely because of this circular or redoubling form or formation of subjectivity that I pointed out before. We could speculate, for example, that we have indeed uploaded a subject in the sense of negativity gap in the discourse. But as I said before, this subject only becomes subject in the circuit that reflects that what in the discourse precisely is not, what breaks down and so on. And this reflexivity is not the same as awareness, it's something else. So perhaps if we could disregard the kind of temporal dimension of this loop, we could say that we have uploaded half of the subject. With the discourse, we have also uploaded to the IA, let's say, the minus, the gap around which the discourse is structured. And to speculate further, this may already be manifesting itself in a series of phenomena associated with ChatGPT and IA more generally, beginning with the infamous hallucinations. So what if this and other similar behaviors are not simply technical flaws and deficiencies, but rather a constitutive feature of the intelligence based on large language models? In fact, this hypothesis appears to be supported by recent research, which was something that has been really recently these days reported in the media, namely that, to put it very simply, the more powerful IA is getting, the more it hallucinates. The more of this kind of errors it produces. Now it seems almost up to 50% of it, it's like hallucinating. And this is particularly through with this kind of new generation of AI, which they call reasoning systems, where it is supposed to really use reason to resonate. So, and the more this becomes like sophisticated, the more these hallucinations happen. But these hallucinations, I claim, do not yet constitute a subject. Rather, they suggest, I would say, a structure trapped in an endless feedback loop of self-referentiality, which is not the same as reflexivity. So, returning to an earlier point, as a high-structured system of free associations, ChatGPT indeed functions somewhat like a gigantic unconscious. One is even tempted to use the term collective unconscious, although there is little evidence of anything genuinely collective in it. There is no collective form. It's just a lot of people, like a lot of things are there. So we might say that this externalized unconscious, which lacks any decentered or external point that could reflect its own negativity, precisely, also lacks the movement of thought and subjectivity, the kind of movement that is not entirely bound precisely to the determinations of the unconscious. So perhaps we should not so much fear that IA becomes a subject as we should fear that it doesn't, and that it instead evolves into a pervasive, overwhelming discursivity that confines us in a kind of liminal state, something like a pure pre-subjective unconscious. And I do not believe there is anything liberating in this kind of unconscious. To put it very briefly, liberation, contrary perhaps to what some believe, does not come from a total immersion in the unconscious and rhizomatic or all-encompassing network, which we might also call singularity. Liberation, I believe, would rather correspond to subjectivity emerging out of this network and in relation to it, or more precisely, as a relation to it. This is the point where the structure kind of is able to liberate itself. So I'm not simply speaking about liberation of the subject or of individual, but precisely we are free when the structure is able to liberate itself from this kind of nightmarish self-referentiality. So, as some of you surely know, this quote, Gilles Deleuze famously said, if we are trapped in the dream of the other, you are fucked. And perhaps this is exactly what is beginning to happen here, and something that becomes particularly manifest when IA combines with a certain kind of politics, usually right-wing politics. So recently, the New York Times published a very interesting analysis titled How Generative IA Complements the MAGA Style, written by Dan Brooks. The starting point of the analysis was the infamous Gaza Riviera video generated by IA and shared by Trump on the platform Truth Social. So the article is really good. It analyzes a specific aesthetics of this kind of AI production, as well as a distinct new kind of irony, computer-generated irony, that it both uses and produces. And the two aesthetics and the new irony are, of course, related. So regarding the visual style, what stands out in this particular video are, I quote Brooks, high contrast textures, perceptibly diffuse lighting, forced perspective shots in which people walk down city streets and through arched openings. It's not what the dreams look like so much as a visual rendering of a dream's description, complete with mild failures of object permanence and the sense that we have seen it all before, although it did not look quite like that. And I think this brings us a little bit, it resonates a little bit with this dream generated by the ChatGPT that I evoked earlier on. As for the characteristics of this irony, again, this is Brooks, it is not the stable irony of Jonathan Swift or Stephen Colbert, in which the audience can rely on the ironist to say the opposite of what he means. Instead, it is the unstable irony that leaves its real meaning ambiguous or at least plausibly deniable. President Trump popularized this approach by telling it like it is in a way that consistently disregards precision, if not accuracy, speaking in hyperbolic style that his followers understand not to be literal but also gospel truth. The Trump Gaza video is ironic in this slippery sense of the word. It is the irony of saying more than you mean, like this literal golden idol of Trump in the middle of the clip, or saying what you mean in a way that no one could call serious, the twice stereotyped belly dancers with beards and whatever, or calling attention to your leader's weak points as a gesture of unconditional loyalty, like gold leaf everything. So this, again, Brooks, this is the irony that means figuratively the same thing it says literally, but in some different way that is never explained. The irony of a man who calls his wife fat and then complains that she can't take a joke. So Sola Vital and Ariel Vromen, the Los Angeles-based Israeli producers who generated Trump Gaza, neatly captured this rhetorical position when they told NBC that their video was satire, but also not necessarily critical of Trump's proposal. In their words, unstable irony has given them a way to agree with the president, even though they know he is wrong. Okay, so here I really, I would like to use this point because it resonates completely with some of the things that I have recently written on the mechanism and the dynamics described by the psychoanalytic notion of disavowal, which functions precisely through our explicitly acknowledging something. I know very well that this is wrong, he's stupid, whatever, while simultaneously demonstrating belief in the opposite. But still, I kind of agree with him when one disseminates this kind of thing. So the only point where I would diverge, let's say, from Brooks' analysis is that I think it should be pushed a step further. Brooks concludes that, the last quote from him, ethnically cleansing Gaza in order to develop it as a resort property may be the dumbest and the most venal idea Trump has ever had. That's the point. It is not that denizens of the MAGA internet fail to realize such an idea is bad. It's that they are keenly aware of that other people think they don't realize it is bad, so they play into that perception in order to become knowing. It's punk rock, kitsch trolling, the art of making something so stupid that other members of your subculture experience it as smart, and so on. So I really think this is a completely accurate analysis and very perceptive one. I just think that we have to add another layer here to what this practice produces. One that is precisely related to the mechanism of disavowal. Knowing that something is stupid or wrong, and yet nevertheless saying it, disseminating it, broadcasting it, ironically even, as viral videos or statements.
To continue watching this video, click the link in the top left or in the description below.
With a free trial, you can enjoy the full talk and thousands more.
Thank you for being part of the conversation.